Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. Joining me today, just down the Trans-Canada Highway, is Paula Skaper in beautiful Vancouver. Paula is a strategic advisor who helps service-based firms unlock growth, boost profitability, and navigate AI adoption with clarity and confidence. And we're going to talk about everyone's two favorite topics today, tariffs and AI. It's going to be fun. Today's Fractional Pros Canada podcast is powered by Your CMO, the proven framework for fractional CMOs. Learn more at yourcmo.com. That's YORCMO.com. Paula, great to have you on the Pros Pod.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to be here.
Now, you've done a lot and you're doing a lot, and everybody likes to know what box you fit in, especially clients. So what are you now? A CMO, COO, a CRO, a super combination, none of the above? How would you describe yourself?
I describe myself as a business performance architect. So what that means is companies work with me when they're stalling out, right? The growth's been going well, but something's just a little bit off the rails. And what we do is we work together to optimize the revenue engine for the current market. A lot has changed in the world in the last couple of years, for sure. Technologically, globally, dynamics, market dynamics, there's been a lot of change. And so a lot of companies are finding that the revenue engine they built for the era when, you just threw up a lead magnet and the leads came pouring in, that doesn't work anymore. And so companies are having to really rethink how they go to market. They're having to really rethink what their value proposition is in a world with tariffs, with AI, with all of these things. And so that's what I help them do. I help them navigate the chaos.
All right, so let's dig into the chaos, and there's no lack of that. We could probably go for the whole day here. So let's talk about tariff chaos. So you've had some experience with companies. And is it just Canadian companies or U.S. companies as well?
So specific to since the tariffs, I've mostly been working with Canadian companies, but over the course of my career, I've done a lot of work with companies on both sides of that 49 parallel.
Great. So let's talk about Canadian companies who are trying to mitigate the tariffs in any way. So talk to us about what you've seen so far. And what are some successes that maybe you've seen? Some companies, there's always two sides, right? Some companies are in freeze mode. They just don't know what to do. Everything's on hold. Other companies see this as an opportunity, and others are just slashing budgets as fast as they can because they don't see a way out. So what have you seen?
I've seen a mix, to be honest. I've seen quite a mix. Every company that you talk to is being impacted in some way, shape, or form. Like there is some impact. There's some companies are leaning in. They're saying, we got to get creative here. We've got to find new ways of doing it. Some are looking for new markets. I've talked to a couple that are, looking at, do we move production to the U.S.? That is, not a cheap undertaking. So it's a significant investment. And I think a lot of organizations are saying, well, let's hold off on that, because if there's another solution, right, I don't think we're going to see those big moves. There are companies that, had presence in the US already. So they're, moving more of their stuff there to kind of bridge this gap. But overall, I think every company, every business, every entrepreneur needs to find a solution that works for their organization. And the biggest mistake that I see people making is they're going out the front door and they're looking to see what everybody else is doing, right? I don't know what to do, so I'm going to see what most people are doing, and then I'm going to do that because I'm going to assume that everybody is right. And that's probably the worst thing that you can do, because this is a situation where your instinct is going to really hurt you, right? It's we're in shock. I think Canadians are actually getting over the shock now, so we're not feeling the shock. But there's fear, there's uncertainty, and that triggers all sorts of stuff in human biology that causes us to react, right, instinctively, and it's the wrong thing to do. So we're seeing a lot of companies are pulling back. I mean, all you have to do is look at the unemployment numbers, right? Unemployment's up to 6.7%. It's the highest it's been in a very long time in this country. I think it's actually up over 7 now, right? So we're rising unemployment. We have contracts that are being canceled or reduced. We have price pressure on companies, bring your pricing down so that we can continue to afford you. Meanwhile, the employees are still saying we can't pay our mortgages. We need our wages to go up. And so we're seeing a lot of that squeezing from both sides, which is unhealthy for the economy in the long run and in the short run. But it is what we instinctively do, right? We buckle down, and we're seeing a lot of that.
So with
In Canadian businesses.
So with companies that you start working with, right? They engage you, and they're like, Paula, what do we do with the tariffs? We're stuck. Or maybe they're like, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? But to your point, where there's a lot of companies who their strategy is, let's see what everybody else is doing. It's always easier. That's the brain, right? Going like a path of least resistance rather than trying to figure out or solve our own problems. Let's see what everyone else is doing, and maybe we'll find a magic solution to copy. So generally not a good strategy. Good to take that into account when you consider your options. But it's kind of like horse before the cart. It's or cart before the horse. Which one is it? One of those, right? And it's kind of like, first, let's put our options on our list here of what makes sense for us. Then maybe we can go out and see, okay, are there any companies that have done this? Has it worked for them? That kind of makes more sense. But walk us through that process when you're, sitting there in the C-suite with a company who's like, Paul, what do we do? What's your strategy? What's the first couple of questions you ask them to start the process down that funnel?
So the first thing that I invite them to do is to think about the problem differently. Because when we approach this, we're responding to the tariffs, right? We're reacting to something that's completely outside of our control. And our reaction is, we've got to put this back to how it was in December, right? We need to get business back to what it was in December, which fundamentally the environment has changed. And so when you're focused on solving a problem that can't be solved, you're going to spin your wheels, because it's like your house burns down and you come back to the burned down shell of the house and you say, well, maybe if we move the sofa, it'll be better. No, the house burned down. And so I think the first thing is really just accepting that there's been a fundamental shift in the way that this trading relationship works. Now, whether that fundamental shift lasts for 6 months, the last time that we had a bit of a tariff war with the US, I think it lasted almost a year, or it goes on indefinitely. We don't know in this moment. But what we do know is that as a country, we have committed the sin of having one big elephant as our client. And one of the first things I say to my clients is, if everything you do is dependent on one elephant, guess what happens when the elephant rolls over? And so, instead of solving the tariff problem, let's go back to customer obsession, right? What do we do? What do we deliver? Who do we do it for? And where in the world do those people exist that need that help? But also, the people that we have been doing it for, what's their reality? What's what are they dealing with now? What are they experiencing now? And if you're in a market where you're one of, 3 dozen people and you've been competing on price, then you have some foundational issues in your business, and a new market's not going to solve them because you're still going to be vulnerable, right? Um, and so if we really just come back to that customer obsession and how do we provide value for the customer, then from there is where the seeds of solution actually start to sprout, right? And I have talked to people who, we're a country of immigrants. So we have people in this country with connections to all parts of the world, right? We have, I think it is 15 free trade agreements of various types in Canada that cover 51 nations. And we're obsessing about, yes, a very wealthy market, but a market that is effectively, 1/10 of the global population. I mean, we're 380 million. There are 8 billion on the planet. Now,
And
some countries have a
high
heavy
risk
concentration
now.
at the moment. Um, and so, you come back to that customer obsession, come back to, what is happening here at home, come back to, uh, what the real value is that you deliver. And then we start looking at two things. The first is, how do we optimize our operations for efficiency? And that's not about cutting headcount, which is one of the big mistakes that companies make. The fastest way to reduce your overhead is to say, I'm going to get rid of people.
Yeah.
I have some bad news. AI can't solve problems.
What? But we'll get to
Yeah,
that.
we'll get to that. So you're going to need people to solve problems. You're going to need people to come up with the ideas that are going to make things work. So what you do is you look for ways to increase the capacity of those people, to make your business more efficient, to make your customer experience better, to streamline the way that you deliver service. And in doing that, you're able to deliver more with the same amount of people. That generally means that your overhead remains somewhat fixed. That gives you the capacity to be more price competitive if that's the route you choose to go, or it gives you the capacity to be more profitable, and then you can reinvest in your own growth. I mean, there are different ways to look at it, but you start there. Are we as efficient as we want to be? Are we truly living our values? Are we truly living the brand that we are? And when you've optimized the organization, then you begin really leaning into marketing and sales and driving that revenue engine. And that can be leaning into existing markets where you have a strong competitive presence. Not everybody is losing all their business because of tariffs. Like that isn't actual reality, right? There are things that we export that are needed. It's not as though the US has stopped buying milk from Canada. There are things that are still being purchased, maybe in smaller numbers, but they are still being purchased. And so we're not looking to rebuild the whole business. We're looking to grow from where we are. And so it's addressing the reality of where you are and then looking at growth without that tunnel vision that maybe we've had about a very convenient market right next door. And I think that is, the reality. Hey, it's going to be a whole lot easier. They speak the same language. We have very similar cultures. We're friendly. We've, friends and family across the border. It would be amazing if that relationship could continue. But right now, that's out of our hands. So how do we grow with that? How do we expand? How do we compete? And what other markets are there that are very similar cultures, speak the same language, or at least, similar languages? And then I'll come back to, we are an immigrant country. So we have, the presumption that we all speak English. isn't quite true anymore. We have plenty of people in this country who speak many different languages. And if you wanted to go into another country and you needed that, ability to communicate, I'm pretty sure you could hire somebody who could help you with that right here at home.
So it's really what I'm hearing you saying is it's really back to basics. And this situation with tariffs is really no different than any other, let's call it a macroeconomic factor that's beyond our control that changes. Maybe, in the past, there's been some kind of regulation that was specific to somebody's industry.
Yeah.
And that was a game changer as well. All of a sudden, they're like, "Whoa! Our whole business strategy now has to be completely rejigged." It's not something new, and the solution. Obviously, I think the panic level for the tariffs is much higher than anything else because of how big it is, and it's the U.S., the biggest market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the person who's at the top of that, it can be quite an imposing figure, and there's a whole lot more wrapped around it. But at the end of the day, it's just business as usual. There's a new threat. How do we deal with it? Back to basics. Let's look at our values, look at our fundamentals, and let's
Yeah.
look at our options before we go looking at what everybody else is doing.
Well, I mean, look, it's not as though Canada was singled out. It's not as though we're the only country in the world that's facing tariffs. So we're not even on a less competitive playing field, frankly. Like the reality is every country's been hit with tariffs of some level, and we've got an existing trading relationship and free trade agreement that has to some degree been respected. So we have more exceptions than any other part of the world, right? And so we're looking at it based on our relationship with our best friend. But our best friend is fighting with everybody on the playground. So, overreaction is definitely easy. But it's funny that you said that back to basics because there's a whole bunch of research data on what works coming out of a chaos. And you're right, it's the business basics, but human biology is wired in such a way that amygdala gets in our way. And it puts us into a fear response. And when we are in a fear response, all of our higher functions as human beings goes out the window and we react from instinct and we try to protect what we have and hold on to what we have. And in the process, we often lose it. Um, but there is something, Robert, that has changed. So over the last 100 years, we've had a series of economic crises in our world. And each one has peaked, and then we've had a recovery period. And then there's been another one, and it's peaked, and we've had a recovery period. What's different today is that we have had back-to-back crisis after some 50 years of relative stability. I mean, we've had recessions and what have you, but global peace, right? We have been hit since COVID just back to back to back to back. Like it has been one thing after another, after another, after another. We had COVID, we had a crazy labor shortage, we had massive inflation. Now we had the war with Russia and Ukraine, we've had the Gaza war. All of these things have been economic hits that normally would have made companies stop and reset and rethink. Businesses aren't getting an opportunity to figure out one piece of chaos and then they're hit with the next one, right? Which is we're no longer in a world where we weather the storm and then, it's just if we can just keep bailing the water out of the boat till the storm passes. The storm hasn't passed. And indications are that the storm is not going to pass and that for the foreseeable future, we're going to be in some kind of economic or business chaos. And that is largely being driven by AI and the fundamental changes that AI is going to make on so much of our world because we have the ability to have robots that do things robots could never do before. And, that is going to change manufacturing in a massive way. any repetitive task that is executed consistently the same way can very easily be automated. And so that is changing the way work shows up in the world, and it's changing what value humans bring to the world of work. And in some cases, physical labor is going to get more valuable, and in other cases, it will no longer be needed. And so, that kind of change, think how long the Industrial Revolution took. We're in another period of that kind of change. This chaos is just going to be normal.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time because we have a convergence of right now the two big change drivers, tariffs, from a
Mm-hmm.
business sense, right? Tariffs and AI.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you referred how AI, a lot of people think about AI as a solution, but it's also the other side to it is it's also a chaos inducer as well. A lot of people, you're likening this period to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. I've heard people liken it to something even, I think, even bigger change was the dawn of electricity, right? As much as the Industrial Revolution changed the way businesses operate today, electricity changed the way everybody did everything forever. And to me, AI is more of that kind of a change. It's affecting everybody in their everyday lives, whether it's personal or business. And we're not sure exactly how it's going to change because it's underway and it's going to take a while to figure
Mm-hmm.
it out. But one thing is for sure, if we want to talk about that storm that we're in, AI is definitely going to be part of that storm for the foreseeable future. The tariffs for the foreseeable future, of course, that could change tomorrow. We don't know, but it's a really interesting time. What are you seeing as far as mistakes? You kind of touched on it already. Mistakes that companies are doing as turning to, oh, well, AI is going to solve all these problems. We can cut our bottom line. We can cut some people because AI can replace what they're doing. And to an extent, that is correct. There are some repetitive tasks that people don't need to do. They could be doing more human brain intensive tasks that AI cannot do right now. So what are you seeing as far as mistakes that companies, bad assumptions they're making as far as the AI is our silver bullet here?
It's when people are using AI to replace people instead of to enhance people, right? And it's a it's a fundamental difference in how you approach the adoption of AI, and it makes a massive impact, a massive difference in the impact that AI has in your organization. So uh, let me collect my thoughts here so that I say this clearly. It's not that you don't you use AI and you say we're going to keep hiring a gazillion people, right? That is not what we're saying. It's that you look at the people that you have, and we're going to assume that everybody on your team is somebody that you chose carefully. They're someone that is performing well. They have been an important and productive cog in your machine. And so you look at their work and invite them to find ways to make their work more efficient with AI, right? That's the ideal way to do it, because in the process, those individuals will build skills, they will free up time and capacity. But if you just say, I don't know if you saw the story about Klarna, but they made a decision that they were going to use AI agents to handle all customer support requests.
Hmm.
So they created all these AI voice agents. They spent millions of dollars. They let go of their entire team, customer service team. Customer satisfaction went down. Um, they were having problems. Problems weren't being solved. A couple months later, they reversed the decision and they rehired all the people. Except, did they rehire all those people? Did some of those people get jobs somewhere else? And so now they had to hire and train people and have that expense on top of it. They laid all those people off and permanently, I might add. So they'd had to pay all those people severance. So there was millions of dollars in severance. I mean, we're talking 700 workers, right? That's a massive disruption. Customer satisfaction is not going to go back up overnight. So, those are the kinds of mistakes. It's these sweeping changes that organizations are making where they're saying, we're just going to cut this out because this is a routine task. This is a mundane task. Well, if you've ever driven your car down the road and you've tried to use the voice assistant to get directions to somewhere or to phone someone, and the voice assistant has come back and hasn't understood what you're saying, Burma is not close enough to drive to. I'm trying to go to Burnaby. I live in Vancouver, so we're talking basically 2 blocks across the street. Those kinds of things are what happens when the computer interacts with the human, because the computer is incapable of acknowledging its own error. It goes through a series of repetitive motions and it comes up with an answer. And so when you say you've made a mistake, it doesn't go back and revisit what it did. You have to start again. It's very frustrating. Translate that to an unmonitored automated agent. Yes, that gets frustrating. And it's not new. I mean, we've been doing this for messaging when I remember, I'm aging myself now, but I remember when Messenger first came out, it was, you're going to have Messenger is going to handle all of your queries for you, right? People are going to go to a database. They're going to search for their own answers, and you won't need customer service people. You don't need a receptionist anymore. Like, we've done this for decades. And what ultimately happens is companies do go this way, realize, hey, we lost something in our connection with our customers. And so they start bringing people back, but the job changes a little bit, right?
Yeah. But do you think we're talking about a couple different mindsets? So the Klarna example is kind of like the what I've heard called the Silicon Valley mindset of move fast and break things, right? We saw Elon with Doge, and the same thing with federal employees. One day they're all fired, and the next day they're all hired back. We've seen that. Klarna, who I believe is owned by a PE firm. Imagine the shareholders, PE firm, looking at how much they can save on the bottom line. So tempting. Let's just go do it. And at worst, we'll hire people back. I assume that was the mentality, and they hired people back. But for most companies who aren't, embracing that kind of Silicon Valley mentality, which is probably the majority of companies, especially in Canada, where we tend to be more conservative in our business strategies and thinking. What is obviously the slow drip is the right way. I think what you said is really key. You got to approach AI. It's not a replacement. It's another tool in the toolkit of current employees. Now, will some jobs be lost? For sure. I mean, we go back to the dawn of electricity example. When electricity came in, eventually, among those who lost their jobs, lamplighters, right? The people who were going around lighting all the lamps at night. Well, we don't need them anymore. Now we have light bulbs to turn on and off. What did they end up doing, right? Well, they I don't know. I haven't researched it, but I'm sure that they figured out some other job that they could do. So, I mean, that's the realities. Again, it's back to basics, right? Think through this clearly. AI is a new tool. How do we leverage it the best? So what do you see when you're, brought in to assess a company's readiness for integrating AI? What kind of things do you look at to help them kind of map out what's the right way for us to implement AI into what we're doing today, and what does tomorrow look like?
So the first thing I'm going to say is a slow drip is probably not going to work. And I think one of the things that we, as you said, Canada, we're very much like Britain in this way, in that we're more conservative in our business strategies. We take smaller risks. We take fewer risks, and the risks we take, we hedge our bets a little more. That approach has not worked for us. when I first started working in digital, so when I moved from publishing over to the internet side of the world in my career, um, Canada was a leading developer of internet technology.
Hmm.
We were at the forefront. The world was looking at us going, wow, these people, because we invest in R&D in this country. I mean, the one thing that we will throw money at, our government just loves to throw money at R&D. But what happened was businesses in Canada weren't adopting those technologies. So we had world leading tech. We were on the verge and on the way to being a global internet superpower. Canadian businesses went, ooh, this e-commerce thing, I don't know. This whole selling stuff online, do I need a website? I mean, some of my first speaking tours, I was going across the country talking to tourism operators about why they needed a website and how it was going to help them attract more visitors from all over the world. And there was so much skepticism. Meanwhile, our friends to the south adopted it like crazy, but they didn't have the technology. So you know what they did? They bought Canadian technology. And Canadian companies that couldn't get traction here at home went south. And most people don't remember this or even know it because it's not talked about, but there was this Canadian company, you might remember it, called DoubleClick.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember the name?
Yep, sure.
Right, advertising, great Canadian they developed cookie advertising. They had personalization. It was an amazing technology, but they couldn't get traction here at home, not enough. So they ended up being purchased by a company called Google.
I've heard of them.
And the technology that underpins Google's advertising, the technology that it's based on, was built right here at home. We sold it. Google's one of the four horsemen of technology, right? They became a global superpower. There are countless of these examples of things that we've built here at home and we didn't adopt them. And because we didn't adopt them, they had to leave. So they did, and they've exploded. And then, we're paying for it, just like the rest of the world. But that could have been wealth that was created here at home if we hadn't moved quite so slowly. So I don't believe slow drip. But I will say that a careful drip, right? And bringing your people along, bringing them into the world of AI, bringing them into being part of the solution, encouraging them to try it, creating opportunities. And so what we look at first is we look at efficiency, always, right? If people are overworked and overstretched, they don't have time to be creative. They don't have time to come up with new solutions. So how can we be more efficient in our roles? And that is, I have a half-day workshop that I do with companies, and we go through, we can do it for a team, or we could do it kind of more on an organization wide. What are the things we do in this organization that are very repetitive, that are very consistent, that are very time consuming? And it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is, and it doesn't matter your job. Everybody has these things that we do. And are there ways that we can automate some of those things, right? We've all been using AI as entrepreneurs for a while now. We just don't realize it. But when you take a photograph of a receipt and upload it to your accounting system, what you've just done is you've used AI to do the task of data entry that you used to pay your bookkeeper to do, right? What that means for me is that my bookkeeping bill has gone down a bit because I don't have to pay my bookkeeper to hand type all that stuff in, right? My accuracy's gone up in terms of there are fewer errors, so there's less error checking, more reliable financial reports, but my bookkeeper is still in business. I still pay my bookkeeper. My bookkeeper's hourly rate's actually gone up, and she has the ability to take on more clients, so her overall revenue has increased. My profitability has increased, but the same two people are involved in the situation, right? Nobody lost their job in that place. And so I think if you bring people on so that they understand that their job is not what's at stake, right? And what they have is agency to be able to make their job more fulfilling. You have a whole different conversation with them, right? A whole different conversation. And you may even find, often we find things that are being done in an organization and leadership of going, why are we doing that? We don't even need to do that. What is the point of doing that? I have examples from my own company. When I ran my own company, we would do efficiency audits. How are we doing this process? Is it working? And sometimes we have like somebody would ask a question. Like at one point, I remember our office manager said, yeah, why do we still have paper files? And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, well, everything's on the drive, right? Everything was in the cloud. It was on the drive. It was backed up, but key documentation was printed out and put in a paper file. And I was like, people refer to it. She goes, you know what? It's right here beside my desk, and nobody's opened a drawer over there for a year. It's been 1 year I've been tracking it. I was like, okay, maybe it's time to get rid of the paper files, right? We suddenly, we didn't need filing cabinets. We didn't need as much printer ink. We didn't need as much paper. We didn't need those crazy expensive sorting files. Right. I mean, this is, a while ago, decade, 2 decades ago, but those kinds of changes, right? There are things that we do in our business we don't even think about. That's where the efficiency comes in. Once you've got that efficiency dialed in, then you have freed up people's time. And now you can have people start brainstorming, what else can we be doing?
Yeah,
How could we reinvent the business?
I went to my doctor the other day, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, that little thing on my laptop over in the corner there is recording our conversation, so I don't have to take notes." And I said to him, "Finally," I said, because every time I'd gone to the doctor for the last few years, there's been Otter and Fathom and all these AI recordings. I'm like, why is my doctor spending time making notes, writing reports instead of seeing patients and helping them? And I'm like, thank God this is finally happening. I know the government moves slow, and he's like, yeah, it was a privacy thing. The government's concerned about privacy,
Yeah.
which I think is the most ridiculous thing, because our phones are always listening to us, right? Anybody who's using the hey, I won't say it, SIRI, or the hey, GOOGLE, if you use that, your phone's listening to every single word you say all the time. So, I mean, anyway, I was super happy to see that progress. But to kind of summarize what you were saying, it's not about the slow drip, and also I think it's what you're saying is it's not so much a wait and see.
No.
Oh, we'll wait and see what everyone else is doing, how it works. It's more of a try and see, test and see. And it's not the Silicon Valley mentality of move fast and break things, but it's move slow and test things and see what works, see what doesn't, but keep up with the times and the technology, and
move with agency.
If something doesn't work out. Life is
move
never
with agency. Yeah, and I'll tell you, Robert, I think, one of the biggest skeptics you'll ever meet when it comes to technology, right? I have friends that laugh that this is the world that I live in, because every time something new comes out, I look at the hype machine that comes with it and I go, okay, I don't believe any of that. This can't be true. And I was dragged kicking and screaming into AI a few years ago. Literally dragged kicking and screaming into it. A young woman, a young computer science grad, very smart young lady, bet me that she could do what I do using AI. And I said, okay, I will take that bet. I don't think you can. And so we did an experiment where, and at the time I was doing a digital adoption strategy for clients through the CDAP plan. And so we did an experiment where I took the transcripts because I was already using a recorder to record all of my workshops, but then I would have to re-listen to them, and review the transcripts. And so we took those transcripts, and I said to her, okay, here's a sample. She ran a routine and I did it the old-fashioned way. She couldn't deliver what I delivered because the transcripts didn't have what was in my head. The transcripts didn't have the emotion or the feeling or the sentiment. Like there was a lot that was missing from the transcript. But when I looked at what she'd been able to do, and I said, "How long did it take you to do?" And she said, "Well, once I got it set up," and once I got it set up is the key term here. She said, "I was able to get this done in a couple of hours." What she got to manually took me 30 hours. I was like, okay, so no, you can't replace me, but oh heck, can you make me more efficient? Let me learn more about this. And that was the beginning of my kind of entree into the exploration of artificial intelligence and learning what it can and can't do. And developed processes and ended up getting a certification in applied artificial intelligence because I need to learn how things work. But it cut using AI to help me with the routine parts of developing a plan, cut 40 hours out of every project, saved me 40 hours out of a 100-hour project. So imagine if you can take your best people and cut their workload by 40%. What brilliance could those people achieve with the time that they now have? You know?
Yeah. And again, companies are like, oh, I could cut 40% of my expenses instead of thinking, oh, I can increase my revenue by 40%. Right. There's always
Right.
two ways to look at it.
Right. And for professional services firms, I actually have a calculator on my website. I'll send you the link, where a professional service firm can go in and they can put a few different numbers in place, and it will tell them how much they could save and how much extra revenue they could get from the inventory of time that they are freeing up based on, you know, the basic metrics that a professional services company, you know, owner should know. It's astounding. The greatest gains come from the increased capacity. The expense reductions are okay, but you know, if you think about from a professional services perspective, let's say that you are, you know, you're Accenture and you're charging $480 an hour for your people's time, and you're paying $75 an hour for that time, right? You can save $75 or you can generate $350. Which one would you prefer? Right? Which one's going to make you richer faster? Which one's going to improve your world faster? It's the increased capacity.
Yeah. Although in that example, a lot of business owners are going, well, knowing that Accenture is now, increasing their productivity with AI, why am I still paying that $480 an hour when I know it's taking their consultants a fraction of the time it used to because they're using AI? That's
Yes,
thinking, right?
which is, you know, we all think that way a little bit. I saw over COVID, there was a real move here in Vancouver towards buying from local makers. And one of the people had been getting a lot of pushback for what she was charging for her handmade garments. And it was the same thing. Well, the material only cost you $25, right? And so she laid it out. And actually, you asked me one of the mistakes I see companies making. The biggest mistake I see companies, smaller businesses more than larger ones, making is setting their pricing based on the cost of the inputs and not considering the cost of getting the input to the market, right? And so if we don't allow in our pricing money to operate the business, then we don't have the money to operate the business. And we're constantly in a place of struggle. But, you know, like you said with Accenture, they may bring their pricing down to $380. Who knows? I mean, they may get to that point, and I think we will at some point get to that point. But my bookkeeper's rates went up, not down, when she was able to introduce more automation and AI, not because she was greedy, but because the work that she does for me is much higher value now, right? Her value has gone up because we're having different conversations. We're not talking about, did you get all the data entered? We're talking about, what's the projection for the next 6 months? Can we afford to make this investment? Different conversations than we would be having, 2 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that's the key: value-based pricing, right? And when we're selling our services as as fractionals, at Accenture as consultants, we're still delivering the same value. Maybe we're delivering even more value. So why has the value of that? Why should somebody be paying less for that value just because the cost of producing that value goes down? So it's an interesting argument, and sometimes it's tough to convince a business owner to understand that the value has not gone down. So why do you expect to pay less for it? In fact, if anything, the value's probably gone up because I'm actually delivering more to you now in that same hour of work than I used to before, thanks to the AI tools that I'm using. And yes, it may take me less time to do it, but what I'm producing for you is better than anything I've ever given you before from a value perspective.
One of my coaches said, had a question that he would ask when people would start with the whole, I can't charge that much per hour or whatever. And he would say, so you've got brain cancer. And I'm going to give you two surgeons. The first surgeon has a really, really modern MRI machine, gets your MRI done really fast, pinpoints, and he's got laser tools so they can go in and they can get that cancer out with precision, no risk of nerve damage, no risk of cognitive loss to your brain surgery. Or you can go to the other surgeon. He's got a scalpel, it's sharp. He's got a saw, it's the traditional brain surgery tools. His X-ray machine is a little bit old, but it'll show them where the mass is, and they'll just cut a little extra tissue around it to make sure that they get it all. Which one do you want? Which one are you going to pay more to go and see?
Right. What each one costs something different, obviously, as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what's the choice that you're making? So I think as professional services providers, we sell our expertise, right? We sell our expertise. The reality is that expertise has value for a business. And if the business owner values it, then they will pay for it. Just like if they value cognitive function, they're going to pay more for the surgeon with the more advanced tools. But if we're going to go in talking about, and I realize I've done this myself today, so I'm going to correct myself, but if we go in talking about how much time we saved, then what we are doing is diminishing the value, right? What I didn't talk about was that because I was able to complete that work faster, I was able to help more companies, which meant that more companies were able to access that money while it was available. I was able to deliver the plans with more speed, which meant that the companies were able to access the next step, which is where the real impact came for that program, faster. And I was able to capture things that I would otherwise have missed from those transcripts, right? The AI had perfect memory. And so I would be able to go to the transcript and say, I remember we had this conversation and I can't remember exactly what was said. And it would bring back for me exactly what was said. I could go to the exact moment in time. I could see the expressions on the faces. I could revisit the tone of voice. I could double check the words that were used. And that changed the level of insight I was able to deliver. So faster, more accurate, more targeted, more relevant, more powerful, more impactful. And so, the fee you're paying isn't for faster. The fee you're paying is for all the more that you get, as the faster is a byproduct of that. And so from a professional services perspective, I encourage all of my clients to, wherever they can, and not every organization can, move away from hourly pricing on the work that you do. Try to avoid giving someone an hourly rate.
Yeah, again, value-based pricing, right? It's not about how much time is spent. It's about what is the output and what's the value of the output to the client, to the business. That's how it needs to be positioned. Getting that messaging right, though, is not always easy.
Do you go to Safeway and see a box of pasta and debate whether or not the price per grain of the flour in that pasta is worth it? No, we don't buy pasta on price per grain. We don't buy tomatoes on pennies per calorie in the tomato, right? We are used to buying things as a bundle. We're buying the output, right? We're not buying the inputs. We don't question the farmer about how many hours he spent tilling the fields. We don't question the farmer. Some years that's a whole lot more work than it is other years because of environmental conditions, right? We don't question those things. What we question is, how many tomatoes are there? How badly do I want a tomato? And what's the difference? The same thing needs to be true for professional services. We're delivering an output, and our input is actually, frankly, irrelevant.
Right.
Bottom line, it's irrelevant. And so, there's a flip side to it. And this is why people don't want to do they don't want to do value-based pricing. Value-based pricing is a commitment to your client to do whatever it takes to deliver the result that you have agreed upon together within a fixed price, right? It's a fancy way of saying, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And so sometimes, as a professional services provider, you're going to look at a project and go, wow, I wildly underestimated what was involved here, right? I wildly underestimated what was involved here, but I'm still going to deliver it for this price. And I'm still going to do the work that was, I was talking to somebody actually just Monday of this week, and they were sharing with me a project that they're working on. And they committed to a fixed price for a fixed output. And it has turned out that they have done 3 times the work that they normally would do in a project like this. And they said to me, I should have charged 3 times what I did. And I said, oh, what are you going to do about it? He said, I'm going to eat it. I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to deliver the result. That was my mistake. And, when I'm faced with a project like this again, I might scope it differently. I'll know I'm going to take the learning, but, yeah. And that's what value-based pricing is. Your value is your commitment to your word.
Let's wrap it up, Paula. What if you had a billboard you could put a message on for millions of people to see? What would that message be?
Wow. You didn't warn me there was going to be a tough question.
It's better that way. It's more fun.
You just like to watch people struggle.
We like the light. Everybody, not just me, everybody who's listening and watching right now is enjoying this moment of watching you struggle. No pressure, Paula.
You can do hard things.
You can do hard things.
Yeah. If millions of people, yeah, that would be the message.
Love it. Paula, thank you. This was a fantastic conversation. We talked about AI. We talked about tariffs. We talked about professional services and everything in between. How can people connect with you?
33dolphins.com is my website. My name is pretty unusual, Paula Skaper. So LinkedIn, Paula Skaper on LinkedIn. Be great to just reach out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paula, for giving us so much insight and value today on the Fractional Pros Canada podcast.
Thank you for having me, Robert. It's been a lot of fun.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.